Hi, my name is Elena. I am from Bayshore, New York, and this is my testimony. So, I grew up in a Christian household. My mom and my dad both knew of God. My mom was a practicing Christian. My dad was not. He had grown up with a very strict Christian household. I remember growing up, my mom would try to take me to church, and it was always an argument every single time that she would try to go, or even try to get him to go with us. So I did grow up knowing about the Lord and His love and what Jesus had done for us. I believe that my mom set the groundwork for that, but we didn't carry that for very long, simply because it just became too much between my mom and my dad. And it was just too much, for her to handle. I was very much a daddy's girl growing up. My mom used to work evenings, and she wasn't around very much. She just had to work, and my dad would take care of me during the day. I have a pretty big family in terms of siblings, but I don't have a close relationship with any of them, really. I have 4 brothers and a sister from my dad's side from previous marriages and relationships, and 2 siblings from my mom's side from a previous relationship. I grew up with my brother and my sister from my mom's side. They came to the States when I was 4 years old, but they did not recognize me as a sibling, especially my brother. So I grew up with a lot of tension in the household. My dad was a great father to me, but when it came to anyone else, and not just my other siblings from my mom's side, but literally everyone from my family, he caused so much trauma. When I was 12 years old, my dad decided that my mom no longer needed to live with us, just out of the blue. One day we're food shopping, and we come home. All her stuff is laid out in the front yard, and he said, just get out. They didn't have a good relationship at all. My whole entire childhood, I witnessed a lot of abuse, several forms, so much that my sister moved out when she was 14 and she never came back. So things like this were not unusual. He regretted what he did pretty quickly, but my mom was just so over her life that it was almost a blessing that he had kicked her out. So he went into depression, and it was an odd time. I grew a lot of resentment for him, a lot of anger. I didn't want to be around him. I couldn't stand the fact that he would try to pin me against my mom. And I grew distant. And I remember one day he knocked on my door, and I wouldn't open the door, and he just wanted to know if I wanted something to eat. But I remember just being in my preteen angst, I guess, and with everything that was going on, I think I told him something along the lines of get out of here. I don't need anything from you. I remember him just taking a moment. I could hear that he was taken back, and slowly departed, went down the hallway, and left the house. I remember watching him walk away from the window, thought that it was odd that he didn't take his car, so I thought, okay, he just went for a walk. A few hours later, there was a knock on the door, and there were two policemen with his ID, and they were asking for an adult. I didn't have a relationship with my brother. We were living under the same household, but I didn't grow up talking to him. It was definitely a weird dynamic where we didn't speak ever. So it was weird to knock on his door and say, hey, there's someone at the door. So I snuck around in the hallway and I listened to what they were saying. And basically, my dad had walked to the highway and he launched himself in front of a car and committed suicide. I don't remember feeling anything. I think I was in shock. I didn't feel anything for a while. I don't think I even cried until much later. And it was simply because everything changed from then on. My uncles from his side disliked my mom for forever. And they didn't want her at the funeral. And I remember that being a very big thing, that she was not allowed to be at the funeral. And them blaming me and my mom for what had happened. So following his death, it was a struggle because I was clearly unwanted and they did not want to look after me, even though I had my mom. I remember after he passed, I went to live with my mom for about a month. I stayed with her at the room that she was renting, and after that month, I came back home, but she did not come back with me. She stayed where she was living. So I was essentially with my brother, who again I didn't have a relationship with, and I was by myself. I cannot even begin to describe the hurt, the isolation, the loneliness, the confusion. For many years, I dealt with the pain. I was extremely depressed. I was angry, jaded. There was no getting me out of it. So my sister from my dad's side, she's about 5 years older than I am. We became close after he passed. And we didn't have much of a relationship. I met her when I was 11. We were introduced a random day, but because of my dad being just who he was, we didn't have this closeness. So after he passed, that allowed us to communicate and build a friendship. So she would come and pick me up and take me out, and it was mainly to be around her friends, and since they were older, it was it was different. They're all 16, 17, I'm now 13, and we're all just partying. So I got introduced to drinking and smoking, and that's all I wanted to do, for different reasons. Everyone was just partying because that's just what teenagers do, and I'm doing it because I don't want to be here and I want to escape. That went on for a long time. I stopped going to school. No one was there to stop me. My mom wasn't really around. She would come home maybe twice a week to drop off food. She didn't really know what was going on. So when I met ex-husband, I met him through my sister, and I grew such an attachment because this was the first time in a very long time that I felt that I had anyone close to me that cared and that wanted me. And I developed that pattern throughout my whole adulthood with men. We weren't in a very good place, and he decides to go to church, and he asks me to go with him. And I do, and knowing what I had been taught when I was younger, I knew that God was love and that he had died for us. So it wasn't a hard transition. You know, I went in and I was like, hey, yeah, let's do this. I got baptized right away. You know, I let go of the drinking and the smoking right away. You know, they would tell me to do something and I would do it. You know, stop dressing the way you're dressing, done. Take out your piercings, done. You know, change your hair, done. And I thought that that was following the Lord. You know, it was about appearances. It was, you know, looking the right way, talking the right way. None of what actually really matters. You know, my ex-husband and I, at that point, you know, we were just dating. We were just boyfriend and girlfriend. And they said, hey, well, you guys can't be together. You guys need to be married if you guys want to stay together. So we said, okay, done. And we got married, and we were way too young. I mean, I had just turned 18. It was way too young. Didn't know what I was doing. He certainly didn't know what he was doing. So it didn't last long. Because of the way that we were going about our relationship with the Lord, which was more of a relationship with the church and people than it was with the Father, he decided that he missed being in a band, but being in the church that we were in, they said, no, you can't make that music because that's of the devil. So he felt very closed in, and eventually he said, I'm not doing this anymore. So he stopped going to church. He went back to his band. He went back to using substances, and he started doing things that weren't warranted in a marriage. And me looking at him as being my source of happiness, not God, I started to backslide, and then I had no interest in seeking out the Lord anymore. And then I noticed that he didn't even want to be married. He would leave for days at a time. There was no respect, there was no love, and he had asked for a divorce many times over, and then one day I just said, okay, I want one too. And that was that. So at 21, I was getting divorced. And from then on, I went into a bender. I went spiraling. I don't even know what to call it. Because all of my unresolved issues from my dad passing, from my mom not being around, from all of a sudden having someone who was with me every day to having nothing and no one, I didn't know what to do with myself. So I took to drinking again. I took to smoking again. I took to partying, and I partied hard. I didn't know what my out was. Thankfully, I met someone who was much older, and he had a lot of patience with me, and I got into therapy. Well, the therapist introduced a lot of new age practices. So there was a lot of meditating, EFT, where you're tapping, your pressure points, focusing on aligning your chakras, looking into crystals, the whole thing. And I took to it. I did. And over the course of maybe 4 or 5 years of doing all that, I can say it helped somewhat. But that loneliness, that fear of abandonment, the panic, that was always lingering below the surface. My name was not Elena. It was anxiety. It was so evident. It was how I identified in anything. I was not functional at all. Fast forward to when I'm 27 now, and I think I have things under control. And I go through a really bad breakup because, again, I'm not valuing myself. I'm still looking for happiness in people and stability, and I got introduced to raving. So my sister and my brother-in-law, we were very close at the time. We all went to our first rave. And this is like, the dance type, the uns type. So I thought, okay, we all thought this is great. This is cool. This is something new. We go, and immediately we're offered pills. So I said, yeah, why not? Let's do this. And from then on, I thought that I found home. It was everything that I was looking for. It was community. It was freedom of expression. I could really let loose. I could jump off the walls and no one would think anything of it. If anything, people loved it. They thought I was the life of the party because I could just spiral. And again, I think most people thought that, that chick just really loved the party. No, that chick was really just trying to let her demons go. So, the first couple of months, they were fine. It's just, music, it's friends, it's, you feel it coursing through your body. And I think that I have found heaven on earth. My mind is no longer focused on what it had been focusing for the past, I don't know how many years. And it was fun until it stopped being fun. It was every weekend that I was taking substances. It got to the point where it wasn't just pills anymore. It was more. It kept escalating and escalating and escalating. And I couldn't find a day where I was sober that I could find meaning in it. It was absolutely meaningless. And all the issues that I had before were still there, but now I felt, well, I just went through all of this and there's absolutely no meaning. There's no purpose of me being here. All we do is suffer. All we do is work. Everything is money. I have no purpose. I just want to be on that dance floor in another world. That's all I want, and that's all I strive for. It messed me up. I was living under terror and panic. I was having panic attacks all the time. I remember calling my sister every day, crying, asking for help. My boyfriend at the time, which is now my husband, he didn't know what was going on with me because he met me as this happy-go-lucky girl. Of course, I was under the influence. He didn't know, but as soon as we started getting more serious and I started showing that, because for the most part, my whole life I used to hide my anxiety. It wasn't until I was by myself. It wasn't until I could feel that I could trust you that I would show you all my crazy. He didn't know what to do. We went to a party, a rave on Halloween, and I overdid it. I overdid it, and I didn't sleep for over 24 hours. And the following 2 to 3 days after that, I could not function. It was sobbing, crying, shaking, wanting to die. And I told myself, I am not making it past this day. I mean, I've always had suicidal tendencies, but I really felt in that moment that if something wasn't done, I was gonna do something myself. So he took me to the hospital at 1 a.m, and I voluntarily admitted myself. They asked me a series of questions. They weren't in depth. It wasn't a thorough examination, if that's what you want to call it. It was maybe 4 or 5 questions, and they said I was bipolar. So they gave me medications. I gladly took them. I stayed for a week. I was feeling better. I mean, my blood pressure was like 100/60 at that point. I was feeling zen. But I wasn't right. I mean, I knew that the minute that I left that hospital, I was going to go to a rave. I was hoping for it. I was hoping they would let me out early and that it would be on a Friday, because I had tickets to a DJ set and all my friends were going to be there and I knew what was going to happen. And lo and behold, they let me go on a Friday afternoon, and by 8 o'clock I was already popping things. And all my friends are like, hey, Lenny, what's going on? I'm over there on my boyfriend's shoulders, partying it hard. No one having a clue that I had just spent a week in the psych ward. And I wish I could say that it stopped there. It didn't. And it just kept getting worse. My depression and my anxiety, I was no longer functional. I would go to work and I would just be sobbing at my desk all day long. I don't know how I didn't even get fired. I would just answer phone calls crying. I would go home crying. I would go to sleep crying. And it went on like that every day for 4 to 5 months. It reminded me of what it was like to be a teenager again, and I thought that I would never get there again. But this time it was worse because panic had been introduced and I had no control over it. So I thought, I need to get out of here. I can't be here anymore. I need to start fresh. So my boyfriend and I decided to move to Colombia. So there I go, and I quit my job. I put my house up for rent, pack all my things, hug all my friends goodbye, and I go. And we get there, and my anxiety and depression follow. It's like I put it in the luggage and I took it with me. It never left. And I could not believe it. And it dawned on me, it doesn't matter what I do, who I'm with, where I go. I'm just gonna live in agony for the rest of my life. There's nothing that can be done. This is it forever. And I remember calling my mother-in-law. We had a good relationship from the start. And she's a Christian, and she was telling me, about the Lord. And I had gone to church in Colombia twice. One of my boyfriend's cousins had invited me, and I had gone, but it was just to go, It wasn't a commitment. It wasn't anything that, had made a difference. I just went simply to go. But something had to give. So I remember after I got off that phone, I went into the closet and I dropped to my knees and I bawled and I told God, I was pleading with him, Lord, give me a new life. Give me a new life because I cannot do this anymore. It has been my whole life. And I've only experienced glimmers of peace. Glimmers of peace. And something was so bold about me because I remember telling him, I can't let go of the partying, Lord. I'm not going to make promises that I can't keep. I can't. I can't let go of the partying, and I can't let go of my addiction. You're going to have to help me in that. But I will give my life to you. So from then on, I started going to church in Colombia. And it was one of those things where I would just sit in the back, head down, listen to the word. As soon as it was done, I would leave. Turns out I couldn't stay in Colombia, and I had to come back. And I was afraid to come back because life here had been very difficult, and it felt like I was going backwards instead of forward. But I didn't seem to have any other option. So I came back, and I decided to do streaming in terms of, attending service. I would just log into the streaming service that the Colombian church had. And I did that for a while. And I can't tell you that my anxiety left instantly. I can't even remember how it really went. All I know is that I did have peace. I can't remember if it was instant. I can't remember if it was gradual. All I know is that I could breathe again and that people were starting to notice there was a difference. I think it was August I came back. By November, my brother, the one that I didn't have a relationship with, he passed away, and my mom didn't know what to do. He basically died in her arms, and she wasn't equipped to handle it, so I took over all of the arrangements, and I felt a lot of resentment, a lot of hurt, and I couldn't believe that I was the one in charge to do everything. So after that, I started to feel kind of alone. I know I had the Lord, and I really did feel his love and his peace, and he had become my everything. I was even getting over my fear of being alone. I was getting over my fear of rejection and abandonment, but I felt like I needed community. But I ignored it for a little while, and it wasn't until maybe towards the end of December that I thought, okay, well, maybe it's time to start looking for a local church. And I began praying to God to guide me to a place where I could grow spiritually. And I think I visited maybe 2 churches before I found Sound of Heaven. It was during their Christmas series that I had popped in, and Apostle Johnny was talking about being like Jesus. And that was the first time I had ever heard a preaching like that where they weren't speaking about all of your sins and all that you were doing wrong, and they were actually focusing on Jesus and his love and how to follow him for his example. So I decided that, okay, I'll come, I'll stick around, and I did. And it's been a year now that I have been attending Sound of Heaven, and it's been an immense blessing. I have found the community that I thought I had found in raving. The Lord has corrected a lot of beliefs that I had prior to that weren't accurate. And most of all, he has restored my love, because it was very hard to love, but he has done that. And most of all, and I will say this over and over and over again, he has given me a sound mind. I cannot relate to that depression. I cannot relate to that anxiety. I cannot relate to the panic attacks. Yes, there have been moments where I have experienced slightly of what that anxiety may feel like, but the difference is that it is no longer crippling and it is fleeting. Instantly, all I have to do is call upon the Lord and he is there. And I know that there are going to be people who can relate and some who can't, and some who will say, well, my life is great, I have a great job and a perfect spouse, or a wonderful family, great upbringing. But the Lord really put it on my heart as I was thinking about what I would say in regards to my life, and it was along the lines of, well, if everything is perfect, then that's wonderful. But we don't serve the Lord for what he can do. We just serve him for who he is. So he's not just for the broken. He's for everyone. If any part of you was touched by my story, I welcome you to come to Sound of Heaven. We are a community here. We love and we understand, and we are here to help you and to build friendship and to build a relationship with the Lord and with one another.